And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Tech Talk. I'm your host, Matt Presti. This is a re-record with Ian Spellman. The audio was unfortunately awful on the last recording, but that happens sometimes in this business. So we're going to re-record this, and I'll introduce Ian in just a couple minutes here. But as you can see, the links that are on your screen, if you'd be so kind to help support this stream by using the QR codes that are in the top left corner, Cash App, or buy me a beer/coffee at the QR code that is on your screen, I would much appreciate it. I'm doing this on a donation basis, so every little bit helps to keep this ship afloat and running. Continue to bring you interesting guests that I find interesting as well in my exploration of consciousness. So, with that, I'd like to bring Ian aboard. Welcome, sir, back to the redo part 2.
Yeah, feels great to be back.
Yeah, man.
Hello,
yeah,
everyone.
for sure. So I'll do a quick reading here of your intro. You are a vocational educator creating science curriculum, which you've named Lifeology. Very cool name. I like that. And you do alternative-minded homeschooling and unschooling for families who are looking to learn the subject without the baggage of the dogmatic, materialistic, reductionist paradigm undergirding it. This is in recognition of the fact that many parents have become disillusioned with both the scientific and educational institutions since the turn of the decade when the world was hit by COVID hysteria. No, I can actually say COVID. Hysteria and racial gender ideologies. Common and understandable response has been to turn to homeschooling, but this has brought with it the challenge of finding educators who both share their personal freedom-oriented values and can completely present the subject. Ian's goal is to help fill that gap so that the upcoming generation of young folks have the opportunity to receive an intensive holistic education in both science and philosophy, so that the powers who pretend to be are unable to continue using the veneer of science to obfuscate truth and separate the masses from nature and the self. So, excellent. Welcome aboard.
All right.
So, why don't you just give the audience a little more about yourself? How did you get from the U.S., from Boston, if I'm correct,
Yep.
to Thailand? What got you on that whole adventure?
Yeah. Well, it's a long story, and it's always a difficult time picking, like, okay, which point do I start at? So yeah, I grew up a little bit south of Boston in Plymouth, land of the Mayflower and the Pilgrims, and basically what brought me out to Thailand. I really just needed some space away from home for various reasons. I was just kind of going through a bit of a rough patch. And so I had a friend from university who at the time just happened to be living out here for a while. And he had always been telling me for years, like, you should come and visit me in Asia, because he'd been living all over, like Taiwan, Japan. Then he moved to Thailand. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I kind of want to get away for a little bit. So I'll just come and visit you in Thailand. The plan was to stay for a month or two and just kind of clear my head. That month or two little holiday then turned into, coming on 8 years now, and a life and a business and, marriage and all that stuff. So now I'm kind of in it for the long haul. Like a lot of expats that come here, I fell into education just as a way of like maintaining a visa, maintaining an income as well, and found I actually really liked it because, a lot of people, they'll go to foreign countries like Thailand or wherever else, and they'll do teaching just because it's something pretty much anyone can do so long as they have some sort of accreditation, like a university degree. And so a lot of people, they kind of end up in it, not really liking it. They probably shouldn't be there at all, sort of molding the minds of kids. You can imagine the kinds of people that would, come through places like Thailand, and, they probably don't belong in a classroom. But I ended up really enjoying it. I had done a little bit of teaching, we'll say quasi teaching, back in the States before I came here, as I did like in the previous interview we did the other day, I mentioned I was like a peer tutor at school for, when I was about to graduate, I was tutoring some of the new upcoming biology majors and in the introductory courses. And for a little while after I graduated from university, during an intern period, I was kind of going through this little bit of as I mentioned, a rough patch, which included kind of like an existential crisis, where I was like, do I really want to go into the sciences? And so I took a bit of a hiatus and ended up working at a psychiatric hospital, and kind of fell into not so much teaching there, but running a lot of workshops and group discussions and things, which was very similar. Ended up being one of the coolest jobs I ever had. So that transitioned really well. I think I always tell my students when I'm teaching them, it's the difference between teaching at a psych hospital and teaching in a classroom often is just like the title of the job. It's there's a lot of overlap there. And so, I've just kind of been with it, doing that since I came here for the most part. And then would you like me to also go into then how this whole Lifeology thing got birthed as well?
Yeah, that sounds great. Interesting on the psychiatric hospital. How did that help prep you for dealing with children? I mean, I know I had a friend who used to work, and he managed. They would call him. He was actually a maintenance guy, but they would call him whenever they had a big guy that got out of control. So they brought their big guy in to try to subdue. So I know that you can probably experience some pretty intense stuff with people who have breaks and things like that, psychotic snaps. I don't know if you experienced any of that, but maybe you might touch on that too.
Yeah, sure. We can explore down that alleyway for a minute. That's as far as
between that and managing children, you're probably not much different because they have outbursts as well, so it probably did prepare you, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with all sorts of different types of people, different places in their lives. And I mean, I was on an adult ward, so I was, working with adult patients and not necessarily, kids or teenagers. But, a lot of people, and I don't mean this as an insult to any of them, but, when a lot of them, not everybody, but when they find themselves in situations like that, especially if their admittance to a hospital like that is the result of some sort of, mental break or degradation, a lot of them almost do adopt something of almost like a childlike mindset. So there was that aspect of it, but really what I found working there is that most people who tend to go through these types of institutions, they don't really have, mental or psychological problems in the way that we would normally think. I mean, we did have some people who were, like that. And I think everybody has psychological problems nowadays. I mean, no one really comes out of this current world that we're living in completely sane, but I'm just talking about, these are sort of like your average run-of-the-mill people. They don't really have something that was like, quote, diagnosable or anything. They just have life problems. And when, they're sort of at the end of the rope, they don't have anyone to support them, then they end up in these types of situations. And I realized there, especially with like one-on-one consultations with patients, it sounds like a cliche, but the most valuable thing that you can do is just to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people don't actually ever have that. And I think that's a huge part of what actually ends up getting them to the end of their rope in the first place. And then they're going to come to these hospitals where you have a bunch of jaded doctors and nurses. Again, I'm stereotyping here. There were some, very good staff members who worked there, but it's just the culture in general, as I think pretty much anyone listening to this is probably at least on some level aware of with the current medical system that we have. Really, the doctors and nurses are just going to see themselves as like authorities who, they're looking at a patient in this sort of like mechanistic framework of like, you have a broken brain, and therefore, we are going to follow steps A, B, C, and D in order to fix it. And oftentimes that involved, some sort of pill. So,
right. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. And and kids are now treated the same way. We have what we call behavioral disorders with kids, and I've dealt with this a lot. And parents will straight up tell me, like, they just think it's the most normal thing in the world if a kid is, not focusing in on class. I have meetings with the parents, like, oh, I'm giving them more medicine, like, and they're telling me this as if like I'm going to, of course, agree that it's a good thing. And sometimes I just got to kind of keep my mouth shut and just say, and really, like, yeah. So I almost feel like it's the schooling system itself that is a huge variable as to what drives people into mental institutions in the first place, because you grow up all your formative years being forced to go to this place that I think is not conducive to sanity or happiness or fulfillment. And then, what happens when they get out? So many people are, they have no idea how to navigate the existence, the soul, the self, and so therefore they're going to land in places like that. So I feel like, it was almost like it's like a funnel. It seems, from like our education system into the medical system. If they don't get you physically, they'll get you in the psyche.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You mentioned listening, and that is an art in itself. And
Yeah,
even a lot of people in our truth movement, which in my chat room, Juliana, and I had to mention her again because we're again redoing this, but she
yeah,
calls it the truth with an F movement
yeah,
because it's almost goofy what it's become. And but a lot of people in all areas of life, one skill they have not yet developed is the art of listening, and I think that's really important. So, in listening to the patients that you had to deal with, it gave you, sort of that experience to be able to listen to the kids because they have their own set of problems at a different age, but
yeah,
nonetheless, they're there. We talked about orthodoxy too, and the same glove treats all all symptoms in the medical world. There's no the RX symbol used to mean when a doctor would sign off with that symbol, it meant he consulted the chart of that individual, the astrological chart, which I
oh,
find
that's
really
interesting.
interesting. That's what RX actually meant. That, yeah, I've consulted their chart because you can't just treat everybody with a one glove fits all approach. And
Yeah,
education must be the same because there's differences between kids and what they love and what they're interested in and what they like. And you need to nurture those things, which I think the Steiner model is more based along that Montessori. And we'll get more into that. But I want to quickly throw in a John Taylor Gatto quote. And
sure.
this comes from Joel over at Here for the Truth, just posted this morning, so I think it's apropos.
Yeah,
He writes, whatever an education is, it should make you a unique individual, not a conformist. It should furnish you with an original spirit with which to tackle the big challenges. It should allow you to find values which will be your roadmap through life. It should make you spiritually rich, a person who loves whatever you are doing, wherever you are, whomever you are with. It should teach you what is important, how to live, and how to die. Comments?
couldn't agree more. I mean, that's perfectly well said. And that's the ethic that I think any teacher who's actually serious about what they're doing, they should have that mounted on their wall and reading it every morning before they start their workday. I think, of course, know that's not the case, um, but it's some. It is something that I try to bear in mind when I go into this practice. And some days are better than others. I mean, there's professional demands on you, and a big part of, I think, the issue with the how the education system is set up now is something that's really pragmatic, actually, and that's just classroom size. So you have too many kids, all with at varying levels, very different types of interests and aptitudes and everything, and they're all forced to sit in the same room. Like, I have, in my day job, I have classes of 30 students. So it doesn't matter in that case, like, how empathetic and holistic of a teacher you want to be. I mean, you can obviously, if you're if the content you're teaching and the ideas you're getting across are, good and aligned with, nature and logic and all these good things, then, obviously that's better than not doing that. But the problem, I think, is that students don't really have the time to develop like a personal connection with their educators, like they would have, used to in the past, where it was much more based on like mentorships and apprenticeships or just like small groups gathering. Now it just seems like schools, they just want to try and cram as many young people into a room as possible because, it meets their bottom line. And that ends up having a net negative impact on pretty much everyone involved and society as a whole.
Yeah, well said. We mentioned too previously that I had John Jake Kleisik on, and
Yeah.
he wrote the book School World Order. He actually mentored with Charlotte Iserby personally, and she gifted him with a lot of her papers, kind of as a caretaker. But we covered a lot of that in that episode, and John Taylor Gatto's work.
Yeah.
So education really is like the boon or the balloon that can carry one or keep one forever tethered,
Right.
So
Right.
learning to fly with an education is really, you know, it's probably 90% inspiration. If the good teachers, ones I remember from school, were able to inspire me. And I found out later that they were both gay, my two favorite teachers. So go figure that. I mean,
Interesting.
but there was never any of the kind of things you see today, where you have this cross-dressing, and trans movement and things like that,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
are kind of, you know, insane, you could say. So if there's asylums needed, it might be more so today than in the past. But again, a lot of this stuff, these ideologies and things like that, come from educators,
Right. Right.
ironically, and that's a dangerous thing. And I think you nailed it on the head when you said that, there is a tie between schizophrenia and education, because they're actually pushing these ideologies. And in so many school systems too, you see a hyper focus on sociology,
Yeah.
which is what leads to all this kind of stuff. Do you have comments on that? And then I'd like you to continue with how you got into, transforming from the medical establishment into the educational world.
Yeah. Sociology in general, I think is a great subject. Honestly, I have a degree in biology. My other degree is in sociology, so I had to go through all of that as well in university. And I really appreciated that education. Kind of teaches you to think in some really interesting ways. It's just sort of unfortunate that the whole field is just like all these other fields of the sciences are just completely, overtaken, held captive by this materialist, reductionist, sort of like morally relativistic worldview that we all talk about so much. And so one of the things that I've now done is I actually teach like a psychology and social sciences class as well, and that's even a part of Lifeology. I plan to really refine out those models and make it sort of like towards the tail end of the whole curriculum. I want to transition from biology and see, well, how do these principles affect like our society? Because societies sort of behave like organisms themselves. There's a lot of parallels there. But the problem, I think, of like, first of all, the biases within it, and then also just getting people started so young on that idea, then sort of it imparts this idea of like the society being the most important thing that you can belong to, right? Because sociology very much cuts out the individual from the equation. They're just going to be
Right.
seeing things as terms of like large social movements, and we're basically all just single cells of the large organism that is society. And that's it. As I said, it's a interesting perspective to take. It has its uses as a model to work with sometimes, but it doesn't nearly capture the whole picture. And so this emphasis that we have on the social sciences now is going to, I think, be a huge driver as to why students now feel, or young people in general, feel the need to figure out, okay, well, which group do I belong to? Which social role am I playing? There's no emphasis now on, well, who am I really? What is my inner world life? What is, what is my higher self wants of me? Now it's just all, super egos and conglomerates and, all these things that have really stolen the spotlight from people's worldview. And I think that's why we have all these personas running around, not real people, just like plastic organic robots. I believe you're muted.
Always happens once. That kind of steals away the path of the individual,
Yeah.
the approach of learning the self, more of an inward focus, as much as education must be outward toward the senses. Obviously, we live in a sense-based world. We have to learn the things that, like a Russell would say, a man that a man not knoweth his numbers or his letters than not to know the beauty of the dawn. Because what one inspires the soul more? So I think it's an important thing to have the balance between that inward understanding and the outward. And like you said, the mass movements in education, sociology, and things of that nature, the dark side of sociology is that it only focuses on the mass, as you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, how did you get now from when you were in the mental institution working with psych patients and things like that? How did you jump ship into an education process? And tell us a little bit about that. You had mentioned in the last interview that you started at a Steiner school, if I'm right.
Oh yeah. So bit of a journey to get there. How I ended up transitioning from hospital work into education was really just because I moved across the world. I moved to Thailand, and so I had to get a job doing something, and they're not really going to hire a foreigner to work with a bunch of Thai people who are in an institution, because that's usually not going to work. And especially back then, I came here without knowing a scrap of the language,
Sure.
maybe just a few words. So that wouldn't have worked. But what the opportunity that is presented to us over here very readily, especially if you're sort of like a Caucasian aesthetic person like myself, like it's, quite easy to find a job in education. Since I already knew that I liked education, I kind of had a feeling I would like my life to go in this way anyway. It sort of all worked out. So really, it was just as simple as that. I moved here, and that was what was available. And once I started in Thailand, I didn't actually start at a Steiner school. That came later, after I'd been doing this for a few years. I worked at a couple different schools for the first few years I was here. Ended up at an international school just outside of Bangkok. Worked there for a couple years, and I was there when the whole COVID thing started, like really coming about in early 2020. I was just kind of working as an English teacher there. I wasn't even a science teacher yet, and so that's when all of the sort of crazy rules started coming around, like make sure you're wearing the mask and the social distancing, all the stuff that we're all probably very sick of hearing about.
Right.
And kind of at first, when COVID first started being talked about, for those first few months, I was actually kind of on board with being cautious about it, because I was well aware of the concept of the New World Order and all of these conglomerate powers. I had already sort of like researched like those types of things before, so was well aware of it. And working in the medical institution before, I went into that knowing, not full well, but pretty well, the evils of the pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
But so when COVID first started coming around, my first assumption is like, this is it. This is going to be like the kill virus. This is just straight depopulation. I was thinking, until, a few months goes by, and I'm like, okay, well, where's all the dead bodies, right? Like,
Right.
So then I started transitioning out of it. And so while I was at the school, I was one of the first teachers there, one of the few who started really questioning this thing and, walking in through the front doors in the morning without wearing a mask. And so that was causing a lot of issues with the people there because obviously, most people were blinded by the fear of it and the hysteria. And so, that sort of made me stick out like a sore, sore thumb and everything. So I was then getting targeted and sort of like, lightly threatened, like you got to start doing this and blah, blah, blah. And eventually after, a few months of going through that, I was just like, okay, screw it. I can't deal with this anymore. The school is insane. And at the time I had then gotten had a mutual friend who worked at the Steiner School, also in Bangkok, who was like, okay, well, we actually need a new teacher. Because I was letting her know, like, I'm looking to get out of my job. It's driving me crazy. So it's like, cool. All right. I ended up applying, getting the job, then worked for the Steiner School pretty much all through like 2021, thinking that, okay, here is the place that if anywhere in Thailand is going to keep its sanity or at least its open-mindedness towards different perspectives on these, and they're really going to consider the psychological health of the children, it's going to be this outdoor Montessori, beautiful nature school, right? It had like one of the most beautiful campuses I'd ever been on. It was amazing, their mission, but unfortunately, no, didn't play out that way at all. They were totally bowing down to everything that was going on, even the unnecessary stuff. And so obviously I was there. They hired me to be sort of like the science teacher because they needed someone with a science background. So of course, they were all about listening to me when I'm building out these lessons on like botany and plant science for the kids and all that. But of course, as soon as I then start pointing out sort of like scientific reasons as to why we should at least be skeptical of some of these things, that's a big problem. So I was basically given an ultimatum. I wasn't fired per se, but I was told by my supervisor, like, you either got to do this, you got to start wearing the mask, and you got to start making sure your kids are wearing the mask. Because that was the biggest thing, is like I was working with small children there, like 5 and 6 years old, and I was like, you can pay me millions of dollars a month. I'm not here to be a propaganda piece. I'm not here to abuse kids. So, even if I were to go along and wear the mask, like, I'm not going to be enforcing it with kids. There's no way. So basically given the ultimatum, like, either do that or, you're going to get a pink slip. So I just decided to end it peacefully and end my relationship with them. That ended up, that's eventually what led to the formulation of Lifeology. So we can get into that next, unless you have any sort of like comments or questions about any of that.
Yeah, I don't mean to be stereotypical, but I do travel the country about 6 months out of the year. And my experience in what I've seen is that the most people, in terms of my encounters, this is my own experience, but I have heard this echoed by other people, the most masking of all populations, from my own experience and what I've seen as well from others who I've discussed this with, are the Asian population.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to me because obviously mask wearing is nothing new. They wear them in Beijing and China because of the air pollution.
Right.
So it's sort of, and followed by that would be black females and then old liberal white women. I think in that order, but it's still, I notice today, even when I travel, that those are basically the main three that I see, if any, still masking. Occasionally an old man here and there, but it's really, that was a psychological operation that, if you had your scruples about you through that from the beginning, then you were well informed, I would say, and not buying the bullshit. So to everyone who did, and to yourself, kudos, because, it is no sign of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, as Krishnamurti would say,
Yeah.
and that's unfortunately what we all experienced during that time. So yeah, how from the point of leaving the Steiner School to develop Lifeology, talk about that a little bit if you would.
Yeah. So after leaving there, I was kind of at a loss as to what to do for a little while. I kept kind of doing a little bit of like private English tutoring online, but that wasn't enough to pay all the bills and everything. So I was racking my brain. Like I really felt like my vocational calling was in education. I knew what I wanted to do. Um, but I just didn't really, for some reason, there was some sort of blockage, like knowing what exactly, how exactly to go about it. But you know, a few months, I think, I can't remember the exact timing of everything, but I would say a few months before I left the Steiner School, I happened to listen to Beth Martin's on her interview on Unslaved. Just like, I've been an Unslaved listener for a long time. It's how I first came across your work as well. So for some reason, like what she said in that interview just sort of stuck with me. So, I ended up realizing, okay, she's like a entrepreneurial coach who's also, sort of, we'll say, aware of the bullshit of the world. So, okay, here's someone I can at least maybe have a consultation with, because I've never been an entrepreneur. I've always grown up sort of in like a middle working class family. So like the whole concept was alien to me. So met with her, and we became pretty good friends. She's a really, really beautiful woman, great lady. And eventually, something must have worked with her coaching, because I think in the previous interview I mentioned, I was kind of like up at night. I couldn't sleep. I was like totally awake, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. I just remember like everything, the whole vision of what would eventually become Lifeology just sort of flashed into my mind. Like I just knew, I was like, that's it. And so I kind of sat up in bed and turned on a little lamp, and I just started jotting down everything that I needed to do, writing out like a really rough, basic sort of like outline sketch of what it was going to be. And yeah, I guess from there, the rest is history. I've been sort of in development ever since, and taking on beta students here and there. And it's a lot of work. It's going to continue to be a lot of work for probably a few years, at least into the future. And, ultimately it's a lifelong project that will never be done, but enjoying every second of it. So really that is kind of how this all came about, was sort of a mixture of desperation and I guess just divine timing. Happened when it was supposed to happen.
Well, like you and so many others, those flashes that occur sometimes in the middle of the night, for multiple different reasons, but the blueprints emerge out of such an experience. So I recall one where the guy who developed the laser was about to run out of funding, and he just basically said, fuck it, I'm going to take a walk in the woods. And all of a sudden, bam, here comes the missing piece of what he was missing. And, over that weekend, he turns things around at the lab and develops the laser. There it stands before you. So those moments are precious because they can completely change the course of a human being's life, and that's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So leaving, let's say, when you entered into Lifeology, first off, tell us how did you come up with that word, and how would you define it?
Yeah. So this came from my study and interest in etymology. So I do a lot of this with my students. I think, at least once or twice in every module, I have a word that we do in a sort of etymological evolutionary tree of. So any students listening will be familiar with those. And I, of course, knowing that I was going to have this curriculum that was going to be at least have the science of biology as its central pillar. I go off in lots of different directions and I interweave other subjects into it, but I am, by formal training, academic training, I'm a biologist. So I was looking into this word because we're always told that bio means life and ology means the study of, right? Or a discourse on. But looking into it, I realized that the prefix bio or bios has a completely different meaning, right? It's actually more accurate to apply it to words like biography, which is sort of the events from in between a person's life. So it's
Hmm.
more like, it's more associated with like a person's or an individual's personal journey through life, um, the events between birth and death and all that. But the prefix or the word that's supposed to refer to the flora and the fauna, the types of things you typically study in the field of biology that people normally associate with that word, the Greek word for that was actually zoe, which is where we get our modern English word zoo from, as well as the word zoology. And zoology is now taken as like a subfield of biology. It's the study of animals. But probably if we're sticking strictly to etymology, the field of biology should probably have its name just be zoology. Zoology should cover everything from the animals to the plants to the bacteria to their inner workings in the cells, like that. So if I could wave a magic wand and just sort of like fix the verbiage that we use, that's one thing I would go with. But so how did I land on Lifeology from there? Well, I wanted my program to not only cover this sort of knowledge about the flora and fauna and the inner workings and the mysteries of the cells and genetics and all that stuff, but because I'm interweaving things like psychology and philosophy, mythology, history, all of these different subjects, I realize I'm kind of covering lots of different areas that could be relevant to a person's life. So I'm discussing both the Zoe and the bios in a way, and both of those translate to life. So why not just say that this program is a discourse on life, all of it, the flora, the fauna, and all the other things that are relevant to our day-to-day existence.
That's awesome. So, we're going to get into Thai food, guys. Just, I know some of you probably have listened to the previous episode, but we'll definitely get into that. With your
Yep.
method of Lifeology, how do you work with that? Are you doing mostly one-on-one, more of a tutoring situation, or do you actually run a class? Or are you looking
Yep.
to eventually increase to more than one-on-one?
Right. So far, it's been mostly one-on-ones. I recently, um, over the past couple months, as a result of the interview I did back in January with Here for the Truth, I started my first ever small group session. So that's been sort of a
Excellent.
big step. Eventually, I want to work it up so that I'm teaching a bit larger groups. But I also think, like I said at the beginning, you reach a point of diminishing returns when the group gets too big. So ultimately, I would really like to keep it to sort of smaller, intimate groups that all meet once or twice a week. And right now, we're doing it on Zoom, just like so many things now. It's so it kind of looks like what you and I are doing right here. It is part of the plan. Eventually, we'll say medium to long term, where I'd like to open up a physical school somewhere. Could
That'd
be
be
in
great.
Thailand, could be anywhere. And and be able to teach these lessons in person and invite other like-minded people who have expertise in other fields to come in and just have a school that's founded around this sort of philosophy on life. Um,
What's your maximum class size? That is your max that you think personally you would not want to exceed that number.
if I had to go for absolute maximum, given the format that I'm doing now, this might seem low to people, but I would say no more than 4 to 5.
Hmm.
I think
Interesting.
as soon as you get, because what I'm trying to do with Lifeology as well is I don't just want to be sort of like hogging all the conversation space as well. I want to make sure that my students have plenty of opportunity to bring things up and maybe steer the conversation we're having into completely unexpected territory.
Hmm.
I mentioned one of my legacy students now. Um, he's been with me for a while, and I mentioned this anecdote last time, but we'll be talking about, say, DNA, and all of a sudden we're off on these 10-minute tangents on like Greek and Roman mythology because he's very actually extremely knowledgeable about this topic. So I've actually learned quite a lot from him, because I think that, if you're going to be a good teacher, you need to remind yourself as well that you yourself is a learner, and your students should be seen also simultaneously as your teachers. They're going to know things that you don't. And so, some of the coolest bits of information I've gotten from just letting my students sort of go on about their interests, and it actually, if they can connect things, then that's actually going to change Lifeology. Like I'll in the future then cite my students. Like, okay, I had a student and they sort of brought up this point, and so I'll add that into the lesson plan and everything. So that's why I would say if it's any larger than 5, I mean, maybe depending on certain circumstances, I go a little bit bigger than that. But I feel like if I do, and especially in an online format, it would make it difficult to facilitate that kind of open dialogue.
Right. Interestingly enough, Walter Russell, when asked, he mentioned that they never wanted to have large classes ever.
Mhm.
That he found that to be, past a certain number, just, unproductive, you could say.
Yeah.
Because what I think is missing a lot too, and you mentioned the dialogue, and you look at mentors, you look at apprenticeships, when you study under a journeyman, for instance, and many of the trades, they do take still physical apprentices under a journeyman, for instance, in electricity or plumbing, or, pick a trade. And that dialogue is so important, because that, I think, the art of dialogue itself, as a Pico della Mirandola would say, it's a form of consecration, where you take sort of two opposite, which are two people, student, teacher, and in that dialogue comes a marriage of new ideas, which helps each of them to grow, you could say.
Right.
So sort of a syncretization is the word I would use as well. But you're syncretizing two opposing things, which are teacher and student in this case. But out of that comes a whole new level of understanding and
Yeah.
relationship. And I think
Yes.
that's so important today. So how does, you mentioned how dialogue factors in. I wanted to ask you, because this was such a great answer you gave, but the best pro and con in your teaching career,
Yeah.
if you would share that from your experience.
Yeah. So we end on a good note. I'll start with the con first. This was one of my very first early on Lifeology students that I had. Um, I, we had been learning together for a few months. Her mother got in contact with me, or we kind of met each other. I believe it was through a Facebook group, if I remember correctly, through like a homeschooling Facebook group. And we chatted. We had our interview with the three of us all sitting down, on webcam together, and got along really well. I mean, she was very much on board with the whole anti-vax, questioning scientific authority and all that. So okay, great, we're good to go. And so I was teaching her kid for a while, and she didn't eventually told me that she didn't really like the way that I was teaching the program, because she had in mind that it seemed like from what she expressed, she was thinking I was only going to be teaching like alternative perspectives. And I kind of got the sense that she thought that because I was teaching, I think it was because I was teaching like a mainstream approach to like the concept of how chemical reactions occur. So we were doing like basic organic chemistry kinds of things. And I guess that ended up kind of upsetting her. And she just told me like, I don't like the way that you're teaching this program, or I don't like the program or something. And as a result of that, I felt like I had a really good relationship with a student. But as soon as that message from her mom came back, I felt like, and this might have been something that was just kind of in my head because it maybe psyched me out a little bit, but I felt like then the sort of student teacher bond that we had developed was kind of severed in a lot of ways.
Mm.
It felt like there was now this disconnect or this coldness from her because, ideas being shared at home, right? So
Right.
that was sad, and obviously, at that time, a little bit discouraging because I'm kind of putting myself out on the line here to make this program, and one of my first ever students, or at least her parents, tells me like, I don't like it. So
Right.
okay, but obviously, I didn't let that get me down. I just said, okay, well, whatever.
Well,
It's
that
not for everybody, so keep going. Yep.
right. That brings up a point, and we touched on this too, that the expectations of parents can stifle the development of a child. We talked about the Dead Poet Society as a great movie to check out, which
Yep.
beautifully demonstrates how the rich parents expect the child or the young man at this point to perform in a certain way. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to Harvard. There's no excuses. This acting business out the window, don't even consider it. But that's what he wants to do with his life,
Mm.
inspired by his teacher, his poetry teacher. So in that sense, we see that all the time still to this day and age, over expectant parents who basically crush the life out of a child. And I'm not saying that was what happened in this instance, but it is a factor, and you probably have to deal with that. Before we
Hmm.
get to your pro, though, and I'd love to hear that too. What also is endemic in education these days are that, as the Russells of the world would say, people are taught to repeat and remember,
Mm.
which isn't knowledge. So,
Yeah.
that's something to consider as well, that repeating and remembering just because you can score the highest grade in the class does not mean you know anything. You're just a
Exactly.
good tape recorder. So go ahead.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that about the Dead Poet Society, that particular instance, because literally just today, one of my students from last year, really good student, came to me because now he's getting close to his graduation years, and he had the exact same conversation with his parents. Very cliche. His parents want
Wow.
him to be a doctor, but he's like, I don't feel passionate about that. He told me he really likes archaeology. He
Okay.
really wants to go into that. And so he was coming to me. He's like, what should I do? Like, my parents want me to, you know, go to med school in America or something. And he's like, I don't want to do it. I'm afraid to do that. I'm really passionate about like digging up old stuff and learning about history and old cultures. I want to be an archaeologist. So, I gave him the pep talk as well, telling him like, look, you got to kind of balance this thing with your parents, and, said what you'd expect to say. And, no, yeah. So anyway, I just thought it was funny that this anecdote that you bring up. And sorry, what was your other question before we do the pro?
Oh, yeah. The Dead Poet Society would be a great movie for him to watch with the parents if they
Oh,
can.
perhaps.
I
Yeah.
mean, because that would, not that the kid, because I don't want to spoil the movie, but you'll just have to check it out, and then
Okay.
up to you to make the recommendation. But so yeah, the downside of an experience that you had, and then what is the balance of the best, most positive experience you've had with your teaching, the most rewarding, the pro here.
Yeah, I've had a lot. The story that I told last time, I'll stick to that as well, just because it's something that really stands out in my mind as just something that was really special. So, uh, I, as I said, I sort of teach this class at my day job on, I guess you could call it like consciousness studies or philosophy or whatever, where we go into a lot of the topics that, you're going to hear on podcasts like this, and, Unslaved Here for the Truth, because I'm really into this stuff. And I know these kids aren't going to be exposed to it probably, in other avenues. So talk about a lot of weird stuff. And, during, like, it's sort of after the school year had ended and things were, everyone was sort of graduating and moving on. Some of these students, because I was teaching this to graduating seniors, so they were all just about to go off to university, and a group of them came to my classroom during one of the breaks, and they were all just sort of like saying bye and thank you and everything, and getting me to sign yearbooks. And one of the students, who actually never really said anything in class, like he was always kind of the quiet kid who just sat there. I was never even sure if he um, really, cared about what was going on. But he told me, you were the first teacher that I ever had that made me want to think. And I thought that was, I was kind of flabbergasted by that. Like, never, like you've never cared about like anything you've learned about. I mean, and maybe there was a little bit of exaggeration to it, but it was still just, it was a really flattering thing as a teacher to hear. Of course, that's going to make you feel good, but it just kind of also thinking about it later makes you feel a little bit, somber, kind of sad. Like if he really went through the first 18 years of his life at this school and he never really felt inspired to put too much care into anything that he was learning about. And he was just, as you said, just remembering and repeating the whole time. That's really, that's not just a reflection on the education system. That's a reflection on the state of humanity as a whole right now. Like, why do we continue to allow this when everyone, if asked, knows that the education system is a complete mess? But
Right.
why do we keep allowing it? Why do we keep sending our kids there? I think this is something people need to wrestle with. But regardless, that was an awesome moment for me as a teacher. And I could probably name a bunch of others, but I'll pick that as my number one.
That's a pinnacle. That's beautiful, man. I got chills when you said that, even for the second time. And wow, again, it's like I said earlier, my favorite teachers that I can remember, and I'm sure that I asked this of people too. Who's your favorite teachers that you remember? They were always the ones who were the most inspiring. The ones
Absolutely.
who got you to think about things.
Yeah.
That's what inspiration is. You're you are giving to the spirit of that human being will to look in spirit, literally into
Yeah.
yourself and what it is that you can do in this world. So that approach, like I said, we need hundreds of thousands of more of you because it's going to take that to turn humanity around. And I think education is such an important factor, and we've made it, whether we like it or not, a staple in the development of children. And we
Yeah.
spend how many years in an institution called school or an educational facility learning to repeat and remember, but yet we're churning out good little robots.
Yeah.
We might as well be injecting them with mRNA and creating circuit boards in their head to basically repeat whatever program the authority of the day wishes to impose upon the minds of these children. So
Yeah.
when you do the work of bringing out, the awareness of the spirit within a child, their uniqueness, they're different from everybody else, but not in a way that makes them want to, chop off their genitals, for lack
Yeah.
of a better term. And
Yeah.
one of the interesting things about that whole movement too, John Money, if you look at, he was the father of the whole gender ideology movement, and he was promoted, and this whole entire thing, just to bring up a name, but it's what's wrong, really, in my opinion, and that comes from the promotion of things that are basically centered around depopulation. And I
Yeah.
like to say too to people, if there's one thing you need to realize about the New World Order, what is their goal? What is it? Their depopulation is front and center, period. And
Mhm.
once you realize that, you know, maybe something in the person is going to say, I'm not going to let them depopulate me, nor my child, nor my family. And so, how do you basically prepare and defend against something like that? Well, you have to become educated. You have to learn to love to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how is it that, what is your greatest method for inspiring your students to want to learn and think?
Um, that's a good question. A lot of it is just, I think, because I myself have recognized these kinds of truths, and I've uh, worked on developing myself and coming into some sort of relationship with my soul and rescuing it myself. Like, because I went through the education system as well, right? And I had to sort of get over it. Like Mark Twain, I think, famously said, I was educated once and it took me years to get over it. And so,
Right.
uh, so I think for the most part, it's just being able to form a legitimate human connection with the people that you are teaching. It doesn't matter what their age is. You've got to kind of meet them where they are. And I think once you sort of show your students, my wife just got home. Once you sort of show your students that, you're not just there to basically yap at them from the front of the class, and you're willing to sort of make jokes and listen to them and form like an actual sort of like friendship, mentorship, like that respect is going to just automatically develop from them. Right. And so they're going to just want to engage with the class just because, they might feel a sense of authenticity from you. And I know this, maybe I'm not trying to sound arrogant when I say it, but it's a something that's not really difficult to notice, that most people, and unfortunately that also means most teachers, haven't developed themselves at all. Right. And so I think especially kids, the older we get, the easier it is for us to sort of like ignore this and to just sort of go with the flow. But when we're looking at young children, they have an intuitive sense, I think, of who is legitimate, who really has their best interests in mind and who doesn't. And so I think they'll just naturally gravitate towards educators who capture that. And just, there's the whole thing, and not all of my lessons are going to be for everyone, right? Like I'm teaching a bunch of high schoolers, not all of them care as much about science as others. So, you're going to have a mix of that no matter what you do, especially going back once again to just the size of the class. You can't have that personal connection with all of them. But, being able to keep your lessons light, be able to make jokes and everything, don't just make it all like dry, basically you're memorizing terms out of a glossary of a science book. Interjecting jokes, all that sort of stuff, that all these sort of methods, they work, I think, and take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's excellent. And, again, you can't give away that which you first don't possess. So as an educator, you have to embody what it is you're teaching to others. And again, if you're just repeating and regurgitating information, I don't think that really qualifies as a teacher, to be honest. And I'm going to take a hardline stance on that. But it's sort of, people can read the instruction manual about something and have no idea how to build what it is they're reading about until you actually put your hands on that which you're supposed to construct, which is yourself, your life, And unfortunately, in the United States especially, we don't see educators. We see propagandizers basically instilling in children a program that works for the system, but not for the individual, as you said early on.
Right. Yeah. And the few that are actually authentic educators, they're going to be the ones who get weeded out, as we all know. They're the ones who get ousted from the job, and then that position is filled by yet another robot. So, and robots beget more robots.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Well said. So one more thing to touch on with education, then we're going to jump into Thai food because it's let's see, what time is it here in the morning? 6:04 a.m. Central Standard Time, U.S. But as soon as we start talking about Thai food, I'm going to get hungry. It just happens.
Right. So you can.
But the last question. Yeah, exactly. Last question on education. How is being a homeschooler / tutor challenging for the accreditation side of this? Because a person could be homeschooled all their life, but yet be unable to qualify for a job at, let's say, a chemical company or, unless you have certain varying degrees. So how do you deal with those obstacles when it comes to accreditation? And is there a way that you can certify yourself as a teacher, as a homeschooler, to where that accreditation can be applied to your pupils?
Yeah, so there's a lot to get into there. It's a big topic of conversation. As far as like getting myself accreditation, it's something that might come along in the future, but it's like we're now looking I think, at an enormous social transition as far as like what the education system is going to look like going forward anyway. I think I saw just today, I was looking at some statistics about how after 2020, we went from an estimated, like, I think it was just in America, like 1.7, or maybe it was the world, I can't remember, but like 1.7 million homeschoolers to about 5 million homeschoolers just over the course of like 2020 through 2024. So I think people now are starting to reconsider, like, well, what does it mean to actually to hold some sort of accreditation? Because now so many people are transitioning into this homeschooling world. Well, they're like, okay, well, I got my education or whatever, right? I know this stuff. And I would say hopefully as more people start to recognize that the system that is currently in place is losing legitimacy very quickly. And so I would say, hopefully, over these transitioning decades, those sorts of official accreditations are less important. But I also, on the other side of things, I understand in the meantime, these accreditations are sometimes important. Like homeschooling, parents still need to tick boxes because the state, as it is, it still kind of holds some degree of institutional power. So what I would usually tell parents who have this concern is, even if this program can't directly provide some sort of accreditation, or not affiliated with any like other outside institutions, a lot of the time these sorts of accreditations can just come from taking these standardized tests like the IGSCE tests in like in math and science and stuff like that. So what I'll say is, like, if they take my program, they're going to be learning all the information that they need to know for that exam anyway, and then some. Because I'm teaching them also not just the information, but how to actually be knowledgeable about that information and how to really think about it. So I can indirectly help with those types of things as well. And then also, I guess it varies from place to place, and particularly in the US from state to state. But if you can provide just some sort of like, records that your child was involved in some sort of biological or some sort of education related to a particular topic, you can still submit that to the educational authorities. And I guess depending on some factors, sometimes they're accepted or whatnot. But very often now they're just going to judge this by some sort of standardized test anyway. Because and if it didn't work like all this, I mean, right now I see from homeschooling groups all over the place is like we have random people, random parents who are just kind of offering to teach like piano and other things like this. And from what I can tell, none of them are accredited or anything. So I think it's now just sort of becoming the norm in this homeschooling and unschooling movement to just sort of take a more community approach and maybe not place as much emphasis on having the right piece of paper.
Right, that's well said. Just brought to my mind, I just had a little flash. How cool would it be to put our own school together? I could do an hour a day, or Beth Martin's, for instance, on
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, and just some of the people from this movement, for instance, working together to create a functional online school. But
Yeah. Oh, that'd be a
anyway, it's
dream.
just a quick idea. And
Yeah.
so basically, what I'm seeing in education today is there's a fine line between what we call education and indoctrination. But what
Yep.
I'd love to see is us take back this whole idea of accreditation. Why can't we accreditate ourselves?
Yeah.
And who are they to say they hold all the standards when it comes to education? And if we are to hold them to their own standard and just simply point out one child as an example of
Hmm.
millions that they have confused, that they have obfuscated their journey, taken these little children off their path, and presented ideas to them that are not only anti-biological, but anti-natural, unnatural, if you want to say it. And
Yeah.
you got to call it what it is. A spade's a spade, right? But they are not teaching children. They are indoctrinating them. They are turning their worlds upside down and creating
Yeah.
chaos in society. So maybe it's time we just take the term accreditation back and create our own accreditation program.
Yeah, I think it's
Is
very well
you,
said. I mean, the only reason they're considered legitimate is just because, we're used to thinking of them as legitimate.
yeah,
But society is shifting enormously right now, and I think it's been said before, and I'll say it again. I think they sense that they're losing that idea of legitimacy in so many people's minds, and that's what's causing them to become so desperate and insane right now. It's like
there you
a
go.
it's a dangerous animal that knows it's dying, and so it's flailing around. And while it's doing that, you got to kind of keep your distance. Like, okay, this thing can still hurt me, but recognize
Right.
what's actually happening. What this is, I feel like a death process right now that we're currently looking at. So
It
step back,
reminds
let
me,
it do its thing.
yeah, reminds me of the end of 2112 by Rush. Attention, all
Oh,
planets of the Solar Federation. We have assumed control. We have assumed control.
yeah,
And that's exactly what they've done is just assume after this. You can
yeah,
assume all you want, but it doesn't mean you have it, So
yeah.
trying
So
to
glad
hold
you brought up
together.
Rush.
Yeah. Oh, are you a Rush fan?
Fantastic. Oh, huge. One of the
Oh,
biggest
dude.
bands that had an influence on me growing up, man. And
Me too.
2112 in particular, extremely special
Joe.
place in my heart. Yeah.
Yep.
Love
Yep.
that song.
Back in the back of my music room, I grew up playing in Rush cover bands. So
You did? No way.
I tried. We were half Rush cover and then half original in most of my projects.
All right.
And
Yeah,
our
sweet.
songs were 7 minutes long. Drummers like to want to kill me. Guitar players could rarely stand me, but I'm just like, come on, guys, we got to write
Yeah.
intricate stuff. But yeah, one of my all-time favorites for sure.
Yeah. Oh,
All
cool.
right, man. Well, I want to ask you, you and your lovely wife started a restaurant. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we didn't do this in the original interview. It came up in the Telegram chats afterwards, but this was a thing that sort of coincided with the early development of Lifeology. When sort of as I was leaving that Steiner school, my wife as well was also kind of not really sure what to do with her own job as well, because they were pushing everyone there to get the injections and everything. And I was telling her, like, look, I really don't think this is a good idea. And she believed me. She felt like, I was kind of onto something there. So she also kind of left her job around the same time. So we were both realizing, like, okay, we've got to do something. And it just so happened we got the offer through, a friend of a friend. Basically, there was this uh, plot of land that was about 2.5, 3 hours northeast outside of Bangkok, going towards the region called Isan, if anyone knows Thailand. So it was an old restaurant that had been shut down for a few years, but we had a friend who knew the owner of the land, the owner of the building, and so basically, one thing led to another, and we ended up opening this restaurant, which was rough going for the first year. A very big financial strain on us personally, on the marriage and everything, and we eventually got through it, and now it's looking well. But that was sort of another result of, like, okay, we have to back out of the system right now, because the schools that I'm working at want me to wear the mask and get vaccinated. Wherever my wife is working, they want her to basically do the same thing, and neither of us wanted to do it. So I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? We've got to kind of jump on this opportunity, otherwise we're kind of screwed.
All right.
And ended up working out well. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right. Well, the big crowning moment of the podcast here. Favorite Thai dishes, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, I love Thai food, and I often ask myself, if I was to be stranded on an island and could only have one kind of cuisine for the rest of my existence, I would pick Thai food, just for the simple fact that it's always fresh, always full of herbs,
Mm.
5 different kinds of cilantro used in Thailand from the
Yep.
last I studied. So pad kapow, and I like to order it in the restaurant. I'd like the kapow, and
Yeah.
it always gets Lori. She's like, don't yell at the waitress. Yeah, I'm just kidding. It's, but
Yeah.
so one of my favorite dishes is tom yum or tom cow as well.
Yep.
The coconut. I mean, the flavors are just burst,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's why I think I can say that. But if I ever come to Thailand, I'm going to visit you
Oh,
and
please, man.
have to
Yeah.
come
Anyone
to the
out there,
restaurant.
I would love to show you around.
So
Favorite
your
Thai
favorite
dish?
dish? Yeah.
Yeah. First, before I answer that, just some Thai lessons. So, pad kapao. Kapao is actually their word, or more, it's pronounced more like grapao. I'm still probably butchering the pronunciation with my accent, but that's their
Mhm.
word for basil. And
Okay.
so, and then pat means fried. So it's like basically the word means fried basil. And so, like fried rice, for example, would be cow pat, like they put the noun before the adjective, so it'd be like fried
Mhm.
rice, right? So anyway, my favorite Thai dish. Obviously, living here for a while, there's so many options to choose from. It's very, very difficult to narrow it down. But if I'm pushed against a wall, the decision that I've come to is this dish that's very famous up in the north of Thailand, so up in like Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, those provinces. Um, it's called khao soi. And so this is like a curry soup that usually uses like chicken or beef. Doesn't usually use pork because it's originally thought to have come from like Muslim immigrants. So obviously they're not eating pork. So yeah, that I think that would be my favorite. I would recommend everybody look that up and try to make it for themselves because it's actually not that difficult. Really interesting flavors. It's using like these nice sort of like thick egg noodles and has uses like star anise and cardamom, coconut milk base, few other herbs and stuff, pickled collard greens. I don't know.
Mhm.
I think about it, my mouth starts watering. We were discussing it, yeah, in your Telegram chat yesterday, and as soon as I started mentioning it, I was like, I know what I'm eating tonight. So I dragged my wife out to a northern Thai place and went and got
Well,
it.
that photo just, I'm like, oh my God, I would jump into the screen right now if I could to
It's
eat that. But
dude, it's
it's,
fantastic.
I know it. I know it.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming back on, and I'm sure this recording is going to be much better than the previous. Again, there's just
Yeah.
sometimes those
Fingers
hiccups that
crossed.
happen. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, any final closings? I'm going to run your website underneath here. Just why don't you share, what it is you're going, projects coming up, things like that, and how can people get a hold of you if they want to connect with you? And we'll look over your website while we're doing that.
Sure. Yeah. So the website is obviously a great way to do it. It's a little bit old, so I've got to go back and I think update the website, make it look a little bit nicer, but it still functions. Most importantly, there is a contact me little box that you can fill out that gets filtered to my email. So if you want to get in touch with me, whether you're, if you're a parent looking to enroll your kid, or even like I should also say, I'm perfectly happy to take adults, like just because this is geared more towards like high school, secondary age kids. I'm very happy to sort of educate the educators because I know a lot of parents maybe like, they have younger kids or, they just want to learn the topics themselves. Like I'm totally happy with taking adult students and going through this as well. Or if, you just feel like saying, hi, I love meeting people from this community. I know if you're listening to Matt's podcast, then you're probably the type of person that I'd get along with. So just down to say hi. That'd be great. I also have a Telegram channel that's I'm slowly starting to build up. It was private for a while, but I've recently just sort of opened it up to sort of get more people in and sort of start to build up a little bit of a chatting community there. So anyone listening is very much welcome to join that as well. Upcoming projects. Right now, I'm just still big in the whole development phase. So my free time is as much as possible spent listening to presentations, reading stuff, building out PowerPoint slides and all that stuff, organizing, rearranging. Um, yeah, so a lot of research and development goes into a project like this, especially if I'm the only one doing it.
Mhm.
Um, but more tangibly, um, I'm hoping within the next couple of weeks, I will have a third module put up on YouTube that will be like a free offering. So I have the first right now the first 2 modules of the program as sort of samples for how I sort of run these lessons and what the content looks like. I have those up on my YouTube channel, and a third and final installment will be coming out soon. But this third installment is going to be much heavier and longer than the ones that are currently there, because it's going to be covering all these things in like scientific epistemology and breaking down, like, people use the word scientism, and what exactly is that, and how did we as a society sort of get there. So I'm breaking down a lot of like isms and materialism, reductionism, and positivism, and just going into like all of these types of things. So it's pretty much done. I've just got to kind of polish it up and then do the recording. So that will be coming out soon. Other than that, it's just kind of this. I'm willing to take on a few more groups of students if anyone feels like they want to come on and be a beta tester, support the work that way. I'm definitely happy to network with some people on that.
Well, that's awesome, Ian. And you are really, as a spell man, breaking the spell of indoctrination in education. So I thoroughly recommend people check out your work and sign up, fill out the contact form, get your kid in a program like this, because anybody that can help somebody, especially to give a comment like, you were the first teacher I ever had that taught me how to think. I mean, what could you ask for more to hear from your child? So with that, I appreciate you all. Thanks for coming again and doing this redo with me, and we'll get this up and pop it in place of the one that's up there now. But as always, you want to support the podcast here, you can buy me a beer at this QR code link here. So I appreciate you guys, and Ian, we'll talk again soon. Have to have you back on.
I hope so, Matt. It's great talking to you again, and thank you, everybody.